Hey, welcome to Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicast. This is part 3 of a 3-part series. This series is important for all public safety aviation units. It's important because we discuss the audit that was released by the LA City Controller's Office on the LAPD Air Support Division. The Controller's audit, in essence, questions the size, scope, and effectiveness of the Air Support Division. It appears this report was politically motivated and contains many fallacies in concept, and what it reports is factual information. The LAPD Air Support Division is well equipped to deal with and respond to the report to justify their program based on the stats they keep and the details of the program they keep track of. We've many times discussed how air support programs are the low-hanging fruit when it comes to politicians and bean counters. This 3-part series will talk about LAPD Air Support's program and how what they do will help shape the way your agency keeps track of stats and program information. To discuss the audit, we brought in Mike Daly, who retired from LAPD after nearly 34 years of service. If you ever went to LAPD's aircrew course, you most likely heard Mike's course and his legendary one-liners. Mike Daly grew up in Latham, New York, enlisting in the military immediately after graduating high school in 1976. After his discharge from active duty, he returned to New York and attended college. In May of 1983, he was hired by LAPD and completed nearly 34 years of service. Mike worked his way to air support, having worked assignments in patrol, including 77th Division. He was a Metro cannon handler, worked Rampart as a gang unit OIC sergeant and watch commander before he was selected to air support, where he was a watch commander and command pilot. Mike also completed a total of 24 years of military service with the U.S. Army in both the active and reserve components. Sergeant Daly served over 7 years in active duty, including an 18-month combat tour in Iraq. In this episode, we discuss using stats to prove that your aviation program is essential and not a luxury. We discuss some of the academic studies that document through empirical evidence that air support units reduce crime. And lastly, we discuss the use of social media to promote our aviation programs. Thank you to our sponsors, Bell, Anodyne Electronic Manufacturing, and Shotover.
Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z Podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, John Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
They're advising code 4 on the stop.
But all those people talk about the benefits of having a police presence, you know, the feeling of a safe neighborhood, the reduction in crime, all those benefits that come as a result of the police presence, you know, and it's just, it's like you said, slicing, would you say slice by salami? Salami slicing the data to make it, you know, work in his favor. It's again, disappointing to see this position turn into a weaponized political assassination of air support.
And by the way, just so that the listeners know, LAPD Air Support is not overly concerned about this audit. It's not to say that they're dismissing it or ignoring it. They're not. They're taking it seriously, but they're not overly concerned about it. Why? Because they got the stats to back up what they do for all that money, and they have the truth, and they have the real numbers, and they're just not sitting there going, "Oh my gosh, we're going to be out of business next week." But what we've talked about a little bit before is that there are agencies in this country where if an audit happened like this to them, they might not be so fortunate. I mean, this unit's been around since the 50s, and it's become part of the culture of the department, and it's needed. I'll give you I talked to the chief pilot this week, and he said something that I got to share. He said, you know, air units need to be essential, not a luxury. Well, that's exactly right. And LAPD Air Support is essential. Why? Because per 10,000 residents, we've got 24.6 cops. New York has 42, Chicago 43, Philly 40. LAPD has always been undermanned by far. We've always been in that category, doing more with less. People don't like talking about it. They think there's this huge department. It's not big enough. It's not even close. Even when we were just short of 10,000, people said, "Oh my God, 10,000." Well, it should be 15 if we wanted to be up on par with other large metropolitan areas. So because of that number, air support is more essential and always has been. We have proven our worth for decades and decades, long before Mike and I even knew that there was a helicopter unit. They were proving their worth, and that's why they were getting additional personnel and additional money and additional aircraft and a huge heliport, because they proved their worth through the facts and through the stats. And we all know, if you throw those numbers out there, I mean, one that even surprised me, I'll give you an example. Felony arrests since 2018 to present. And that includes the 4 years that this audit was. Felony arrests where we assisted, 47,333. Felony arrests where we are responsible, air support, personnel, overhead, responsible for that felony arrest, 7,935. By the way that's calculated on the log is, if we're not there, that suspect's not captured. For whatever reason, you have to you would cover that in the narrative. 7,935 felons that would not have been in custody had those helicopters not been over there. That's the kind of stuff that the public needs to hear. They didn't in the 3-page summary. They didn't hear it from channel 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13, because they don't have anybody that can investigate anything, apparently, and get these numbers and go, hold it. What are they getting for that buck? Where's the bang for the buck? Oh, well, here it is. It's there. It's there for the taking. And, you know, the biggest message that I want to share is that every air unit, everybody from air units around this country that's sitting there listening to this needs to say, what if that audit happened to us today? Are we ready to defend ourselves? Do we have those stats? If you don't, you need to change something right now. I mean, immediately. Like Mike said, we're here to help. John's here to help. We're here to help you by talking about it, but we're also here to help you, in other ways. Many units do keep track of this stuff. I've been preaching this for years around the world. And I will say that most units do a pretty good job at this. But there are some units where I just go, oh my gosh, you guys got to keep track of. I mean, I don't care if you go to a barking dog call, you better keep track of it, because somebody's going to look at you and say, this is a one helicopter operation, which is very expensive for this county or this municipality. And we're going to be out of business because we can't back up what we spend just on fuel. We can't back it up because we don't have the numbers to say, well, how many felony arrests were we responsible for? How many pursuits were we over? How many radio calls? I mean, total responses over those 4 years plus, 200,137. I mean, amazing. That's amazing. And this is a big one. Radio calls, 63,452. And air support was first at scene over 40,000 times. Mm-hmm. First at scene. That goes back to the fact that we are shorthanded. We are spread very thin over that 470 square miles. And air support gets there quickly. That doesn't mean that all crime comes to a stop when we arrive, but many times it does. We've all seen that. John, you've seen it. Mike's seen it. Everybody listening to this has seen that, where you show up to somebody getting beaten at a traffic accident and you pull up overhead and it stops. That happens. There are also times when it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Or there's times when they run, and now who catches them? We do. So having these stats isn't just for fun. It could be not life or death, but you know what I mean. It could be the existence of your unit tomorrow. If you don't have them, you got to be able to defend it. And it goes back to what Kevin Gallagher said. You need to be an essential part of that team, not a luxury.
Yeah. And I think what separates, you from being a luxury versus an essential part of the city is the stat program you use, the methodology you use to capture how valuable you are. We all love what we do, and we all talk about how great air support is, and that's all well and dandy until an audit comes down and you need the actual raw data to show someone who's a number cruncher how valuable the program is. Yeah. And just, you talked about the stats. I'm looking at the stats from LAPD that you had talked about from January of 18 to December of 23. There's a lot of different columns in here of information that you guys capture, and it's all relevant and important. Can you guys talk a little bit about, for these agencies that are going to face this down the road? Like you said, there's a lot of agencies that may not have a stat keeping program for a lot of reasons. One, they don't really know maybe what's essential and what's going to help them defend themselves in an audit. And two, they may not have a way or a system in place to keep track of that data. So one, can you guys talk about the stats you keep, why you keep them? While that's somewhat painfully obvious, just important to go through some of those stats. But two, maybe recommendation on how to keep track of those stats as far as a system, whether it's computer, freehand, whatever the thing is that you guys have found valuable to compile those stats and keep them housed somewhere.
If I could just one thing and talk about one of the stats that's important to keep and that Jack brought up is first at scene. And seeing this guy in this audit, he's playing with emotion. We had a letter that we got to air support that we shared with the city council. It was a guy, he came out of a restaurant one night, and he was with some lady, and it was a 211 GTA, and they were trying to rob this car from this lady, and he stepped up and they shot him. And he said he was laying there on the ground and he was shot and he didn't know what to do. But then he saw the LAPD helicopter come overhead, and he said, I knew I would be okay then. And that's one of those non-tangibles. That's some of that, whether you're safe or not, do you feel safe type of thing. And that's that. Now, there is the emotional part that you can bring, and that's why it's important first on scene. Here's a stat, and I know Tony DiMolina was working on this when I retired, and this is a big one but it's kind of hard to capture, and there's a couple of things. What we were doing, he just kind of mentions this off the cuff about, only 39% of their time was spent on Part 1 crimes, and this 61% was spent on this, and directed patrol activity. And now that directed patrol activity is where we coordinated with the divisions, and we would get their ComStat info, where they are having their crimes occur, and then they were given a designation. And so when you were in that directed patrol activity, you logged it as that. And then we would go back over time and look at the crime activity in that area. And I remember telling you, there is a noticeable decrease in these directed patrols. And that's a good one you want to capture because it moves. It constantly, your crime problem moves around as somebody becomes active and someone, so, and that one was a very big one. And you got to coordinate with your division, with your customers. And that's a big one to capture is that stuff. And once again, what I'll tell everybody is what I said early, none of this matters until it matters.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
And so that's what you got to remember when you're doing these things. It really don't matter. Someday it might. You can't go back and change it. So you just got to realize, we're somewhat aloof at the work we do, because we do it all the time, and we're just doing nothing. But you're flying around, you're looking for stuff. Sometimes you're not capturing things you should. Now, the part I would like to say, the good part about this audit that I recommend, once again, read the audit, is he is very critical of LAPD's log system. And if you ask me, he's showing you the soft underbelly right there. He's showing you where he was able to get in and get the numbers he wanted to support that finding. And he makes a lot of recommendations and things. So if you're in those units, read that report and see where he's finding loopholes. And, whether you like this audit or not, with every audit, you can find something else out of it that will help your organization. And that is very useful, because he's saying, because you said something about the other term, and he's able to manipulate that in some ways. So you really, that's something you really got to look at. And then just, straight recap. Number of radio calls, number of object activity, number of arrests, all of that you have to capture. I'll let Jack talk for a while.
No, that was good stuff, Mike. And I just add that I think, and having read the audit 3 times, that I agree with Mike. Maybe if we, well, I agree with you a lot. Maybe air support needs to look at their tracking system and their logging system and say, okay, maybe we're vulnerable here, and maybe we're not doing a good enough job. So let's see, what else could we add to the stats that we keep? I think they keep very valuable stats. Are there other things that I'm not thinking of, or Mike's not thinking of, or John's not thinking of? Probably. So let's hear it. Maybe he could stop doing a TikTok video and tell us exactly what categories he'd like us to track. And that can be done. It's on a computer. It's software. It's not a big deal. I think that's a good recommendation. We should always be looking to capture more information so that we can justify our existence and show that we're essential. I support that 100%, but be specific. What is it, Mr. Auditor? What is it that you're not getting there? We'll take care of that. They don't give those specifics. They just say, their tracking system's flawed. Okay, in what way? It's like the whole report. Well, this is what it is. Where'd you get that number? Doesn't say. How'd you calculate that? Doesn't say. Where's your source for that? Doesn't say. They just print it and say, you just take our word for it. Just take our word for it. I'm a really good TikTok video guy. Trust me. I can't get it out of my head. I watched one of those TikTok videos and I went, oh my God. So you get the idea. You got to be prepared. And were we prepared enough? I think it was adequate, but could we, LAPD Air Support and everybody else, do better? Of course we can. So let's figure out how we can be better.
Another thing we look at, because I've done a bunch of internal audits, and this is important too, is we looked at how we finance our aircrafts, how we maintain our aircrafts, whether in-house or contract. And what you want to show is that not only are you doing all this stuff, but you're also using the most efficient way to maintain your aircrafts, the most efficient way that you're doing your best. You realize that this is an expensive operation, and so you do your best to make it as efficient as possible. That's why we maintain our aircrafts this way. That's why we buy our fuel this way. That's why, and you got to be able to show those savings. And although it's not quite the same as your responses and the work, it is part of the overall picture. This is what we're trying to do. Now, the report says that because of the lack of oversight, they got to report to the police commission, all this stuff. That's all fine and dandy, but you got to tell us what is it you want to see. We can capture all the data you want, but you can't just say you got a report and then give no print. What is it you want to see? And I said this to Jack, and he said, I have no problem with people diving deep into what police work do, because the closer you look at us, the better we look. That came out. That was blatantly obvious when we went to the videos. In car, the officers wearing the videos, those things. The closer you look at what we do and actually see it, just how ugly and just what it is we're doing sometimes, the better we look at what we do. And that's a given. That's been proven a million times, but hey.
Yeah, very true. That statement is so valuable. It's absolutely factual. It can get backed up, especially the great example with body-worn cameras. I mean, it's gotten more officers out of trouble than in trouble.
Yeah,
because we've been dealing with false charges for forever.
Yeah.
Are there bad cops? Of course there are. We know that. That's never going to change because we're humans. But it's proven our point over and over again that we're doing things right. And I agree with Mike that the closer you look at air units across this country and in Australia and in Europe, if you look at them closely as exactly what they do, and you're able to see the stats, the vast majority of people would go, wow, we got to keep that. We got to keep that thing going. Because look at what they do. Look at the lives they save. Look at the impact that they have, the positive impact they have versus some of the other things. It's overwhelmingly good. So great quote, Mike. That's valuable.
For the folks that, like I said, are looking, they may not have a stat keeping program, or they may have one that's kind of in its infancy and are looking to make it better. I'll just kind of go through what I did in my agency. And again, what we did, I believe, was taken from you guys long ago. But basically, the TFO will have a knee board, and on the knee board's a little sheet of paper, and the TFO keeps track of the location of a call, time of a call, type of call they're dispatched to, whether somebody was taken into custody on a felony or misdemeanor arrest. If it was we call them but-fors, but if it, and I don't know where that came from exactly, but if it wasn't for the pilot, this call, or if it wasn't for the aircraft, this call would not have ended with the successful apprehension of a suspect. So you got to keep track of those things. And those things usually result in a write-up at the end of the night. At the end of the night, you take those calls that you were dispatched to and went on, and write down any significant activity that may have happened while you're on your flight. If you're in a pursuit, you talk about the general circumstances surrounding the pursuit. And the reason that's important is what we did at the end of each week. We did a monthly one. We do a weekly activity report. We take all those narratives from the significant activity from the week that would generate a report, and actually had to take those and rewrite them so they made sense sometimes. And that report would be sent to our captain, and then up the chain of command. It would end up sometimes with city management, so that you'd have the weekly activity report, then you'd have the monthly activity report, and then at 6 months and a year, we could compile reports based on the stats we kept, and we could send that information up as well. So keeping track of those stats is important, but also the ability to generate reports based on the stats you keep is important. So if you use a system, develop a system or buy into a system that allows you to customize the reports that you kick out, so that if somebody says, I want to report for the last 13 days, some obscure number, you can customize those settings and generate a report to show whoever's looking at that the information they want to see. So, keeping the stats is important. What you keep is important, but also how you store them and the reports that you can get as a result of those efficiently is important as well. One last thing I'll throw out on stat keeping that I liked was we kept track of property recovery. So if there was a stolen vehicle that we recovered at the end of a pursuit, or however we recovered that vehicle, you could estimate the value of that vehicle that was recovered. And then at the end of the year, you could say the airport was responsible for helping to recover $100,000 in stolen property, whatever the amount was. It really kind of quantifies the existence of what you're doing, in some way.
Yep.
So
That's a good one.
Thanks to our sponsor, Anodyne Electronics Manufacturing, a leading manufacturer of trusted special mission avionics for law enforcement, aerial firefighting, and utility operators. Visit www.aem-corp.com and learn how AEM's digital communication and loudspeaker systems, avionics consoles, radios, and specialty audio products can support your most demanding missions.
We kept track of that. I'm looking at the number. Recovered vehicles initiated, 2,149. Recovered vehicles assisted, 9,971. That's a lot of property that's recovered that you're either assisting on or you initiated. They seem like, that's how important is that? It's very important.
Nothing ever matters till it matters.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. It's good stuff. I mean, you got to be able to defend yourself. One of the things, John, I just have to mention in this is one of the things that I saw that I really got a chuckle at was when they compared LAPD air support to other cities. And the one that they liked to talk about was, well, look at this. LA flies 20 hours a day. Houston, Texas flies 12 hours a day, implying that we don't have to fly 20. We should fly more than 12. Well, I'm very familiar with the Houston PD Aviation Unit, and I'm telling you, they'd rather fly 20. And you know who else would like that? Their patrol officers would rather have it be 20. They were implying in the report, like, oh, 20 is way too much. You need to right size this unit and fly less. Well, I have yet to come across an air unit in this country or the people, the customers they support that say, you know what, we really need to fly a little less because we're flying too much. You know, nobody says that. But there's not a patrol officer on the planet that says that. You know, they want you more. And I'm not saying 20 is, well, we did 20 and that's how it should be. I'm saying that it should be appropriate to what the crime is and what patrol needs. And are you able to then justify those additional hours? And I know LA can justify those additional 8 hours a day from 12 to 20 very easily with the stats. You know, it's just, it amazed me that they would, it showed the ignorance of what air support does in comparing that.
The interesting thing about that stat is they also compare it to its Part 1 crime rate, which is higher than everybody. You read that stat and you can say, why are they only flying 12 if their Part 1 crime rate is higher than ours?
That's right. That's exactly right.
You know, because they just they're throwing spaghetti against the refrigerator to see what sticks, you know? So, you know,
just amazing. Just amazing. So many flaws.
One of the things that the report talked about, and I'll just read what they said, was there's no persuasive empirical evidence that shows a clear link between helicopter patrols and crime reduction, and the LAPD has not done the work to collect data to test such claims. That statement by itself blew me away. You know, there's no evidence. Like, excuse me?
Yeah, once again, read the report and look at what it says. Compare that language. That is a very declarative statement to we want to right-size the organization, which is because of over-policing and other nebulous terms. That is a very accusatory, very direct statement, and you know, because he wants to, you know, that's worded that way for a reason. It's very nicely written. Completely, you know, it's like since the discovery of tobacco, human life expectancy has doubled. It's, you know, but this one is factually incorrect because it's like I said, Tony DiMolina was doing that where we were looking at our time and directed patrols and the impact on crime there for the very reason to validate and update the JPL study. He talks about, geez. Don't get me mad. The JPL study he talks about and dismisses outright because of its age. All right? Let me tell you something. 100 years ago, they did a study and they found out that antibiotics fight infection. Now, it's been 100 years, so antibiotics don't fight infections anymore.
No, apparently not.
You know, so, but, you know, once again, we have done the work, and because he was never there, I don't think he ever asked, because we looked at that directed patrol and that very stuff and looked at it. Side story, the book Black May, which is written, a history book, Martin Middlebrook, and it talks about how in World War II, when the German submarines would go out Bay of Biscay, how they concentrated patrols to catch them, and how they got their numbers and how they did that, and that's what we looked at. How can we get numbers to do this, to support that? And that's kind of played in there. The other thing he says, he mentions that Canadian study, and they say how if there's an air unit overhead, there's a much higher likelihood of arrest, but they don't say if there's any crime deterrent value. Yeah. What is arrest? You know, this is the no bail mentality. You know, the biggest deterrent to crime is arrest. You know, and you know, but and they're saying, well, there's arrest, but we don't know if that has anything to do with crime. Guys tend to commit less robberies when they're in Dannemora or wherever they're sent. You know, it's just.
many air crews and cops across this country that have air support have heard stories like this. This comes to mind where it's a marginal VFR day in the San Fernando Valley. Air 16 is flying and a bank robbery occurs. They respond. They catch the car driving away. They direct units to the car. The suspects are apprehended. The detectives call down to air support an hour later and say, hey, guess what our bank robber said? They said they picked today as opposed to yesterday or tomorrow because it was so cloudy out and they didn't think you guys were going to be flying today.
Yeah.
That's why they robbed the bank today. I mean, it's like we need to remember those stories. And they come up regularly where criminals talk about helicopters and they don't like them. They they know that it increases their chance of arrest. They know it. To dismiss the JPL study and say, well, that was back in 1971. Oh, so bad guys and police trying to find bad guys has changed that much. They even said, technology's changed. Yeah, it makes it even more true today that it's probably even more valuable today because of technology. We do have additional technology. It makes us better. It makes us more efficient. It makes the chances of capturing and making those arrests that Mike talked about, it makes those even more likely because we can find you in the dark and we can find you with our tools and with night vision and all this stuff. So to dismiss it, it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
It's lazy and it's biased.
Yeah.
But I love that story. I remember it vividly, when they got that call and there's many others, but that one really stuck with me. That a guy says, oh yeah, I picked that in to rob the bank because I didn't think you guys be flying. It's raining and the clouds are like, it's like, oh my God. And all of a sudden he's getting pulled over and wondering why. And he looks up and goes, oh, they're flying. Damn.
Right.
It's amazing.
There's so much anecdotal evidence that supports the fact that air support reduces crime and increases safety on the ground. But,
Yes.
Going back to documenting that stuff, unless you can document that stuff and submit that to somebody who's preparing an audit like this, it doesn't exist. That auditor is not going to take the time to go track those stories down. So we've got to make an effort as collective and individual air units to write that stuff down. So make sure that you're getting that information if possible. I know some units will, if they believe a circumstance like that exists, they'll call down to the station, the person interviewing a suspect, and say, ask the suspect what he did or why he did that. And if there's information that is beneficial for your program, write that down and document it because that's important.
Yeah. We talk to guys in Canine. We talk to guys all the time about, so why'd you hide here? What did you do then? And most of them tell you to pound sand, but the ones that talk, gold.
Yeah.
Gold. We would learn things and go, holy crap. And we would call air support and say, hey, just so you know, this guy said this. And air support would go, wow, that's enlightening. They are very aware of how we do business. And they're aware of that FLIR, that helicopter, the dogs, the SWAT teams. They're aware of all that. And the fact that we're out there flying 20 hours a day, anybody that says that doesn't deter crime has no common sense at all, because it does. If you're going to break into a car and you hear the sound of rotor blades and you still break into that car, you're insane. They're not. They're moving on. They're waiting. They're moving someplace else, and they're not going to do it. They know about the tools we have, and they're dismissing that in this report completely.
Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, sole 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24 megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
It's funny. The first thing that I Googled when I read that statement that there's no clear evidence, I just typed in a Google search, do police helicopters deter crime? And the first thing that popped up was a study. And like you'd mentioned, it's an older study. It's from 1978, but it took place in Nashville. And basically these researchers, what they did was they tracked whether or not helicopters reduced the amount of burglaries that were taking place in this area. And it was a high crime area. And they looked at not only did the burglaries go down, but did the cost of operating that helicopter, was there a cost benefit analysis? Was there a cost benefit to doing that? And they were able to prove that not only did crime go down, but it was costly and it was a great program for the area. So, again, going to them, making a statement that's wildly untrue, a simple search reveals this information. They talk about this study took place between the normal burglary hours of 9 to 5. Why do most burglaries take place between the hours of 9 to 5? It's because people are at work during those hours. So it's just common that your drug addicts are going to break into homes when people are at work. And the other point in the report that was funny was that they were talking about the flight hours and basically saying that LAPD should look at the hours that they're responding on calls. And I think the hours of like 4 to noon or 4 to 2 were some of the hours that they identified. What it's 8 to 2 or whatever it was.
Yeah,
were the hours that they suggested maybe you shouldn't fly during those hours. But if you look at this research, that's goes back to showing this is when burglaries are taking place. Why would you not fly during those hours? You're deterring residential burglaries and all these things that are taking place. So, anyways, my 2 cents there. Again, there's so many holes to poke in this report, and we've talked about some of the stats that people can utilize as a way to prevent their unit from going through the same thing. Any other points on the stats part of it before we kind of move on?
You should talk to as many units as you can and say, what do you do? I mean, that's why, networking is so important. We've always said, like at the aircrew course, they say it every year at the LAPD aircrew course. Yes, we're going to have a bunch of classes this week. We hope you learn stuff, but you're going to learn more from each other talking during the breaks and at lunch and at breakfast and in the evenings than you're going to learn from us. And that is always true. It's always true. And that's why you got to talk and say, hey, so what are you guys doing? What kind of system do you have to track your stats? And you will learn stuff from others, and then you can formulate what's right for your unit, for where you work, for the size of the unit, for what you have to defend and justify. And for some, it's going to be a lot more complex than others. I get that, but you got to have something. And if you don't have anything, you're risking an activist doing an audit and putting you out of business tomorrow.
Yeah,
tomorrow. That because a city council is going to look at an audit where you don't even have stats to back it up. They're going to go, oh my gosh, we're paying how much? Well, we don't need this because you're not providing us anything to justify that amount.
Yeah,
you're gone.
Right.
They're going to close you down and spend the money someplace else.
One of the other parts that was misleading in the report that I'd like to talk about, and for you guys to provide some context, talk about transportation of city officials and ceremonial flights. And I'll just read again from the report. It says, at least some of the transportation and ceremonial flights were an ineffective or inappropriate use of city money as they provided little to no public safety benefit. Can you guys put some context to that as far as, how you guys utilize that in LA?
Many of those ceremonial flights are during a patrol shift where you get word either at roll call from the watch commander or you get a radio, you get the information over the radio from the tower saying, hey, watch commander has approved a flyby at this event and, at the academy or for a graduation or for a funeral or for whatever it is. And then you go do it. They implied that was 700 plus times when, you did that instead of fighting crime. Nonsense. That is a low priority thing. Now, are there ceremonial flybys for like an officer kill line of duty where there's four dedicated aircraft that's going to fly a formation flight? Of course there are. But those are, I don't know the number per year, but it's a handful. I mean, it's not that many. It's probably Mike, jump in. 6 to 8, maybe?
No, and I doubt
Maybe
that.
not even that.
I doubt that. I think
Yeah.
it's less than a handful. And,
Yeah.
And
So-
yeah, ceremonial flyby flights, those are done when you're able to fit them in.
Right.
Technically, they're not supposed. He's implying that we're taking off just to do that.
Yeah, that's
That's
ridiculous.
Transportation flights. He makes up he states, okay. He states that maybe we need to update the manual and get more specific about that. And there is where we're transporting command and staff officers, and that's to them to justify. Yeah,
Yes.
we can't say no. It's a million. If you want to know why they thought that was fiscally responsible or that needed to be done, that's for the command staff to justify, and I'm sure there's very good reasons, to do that. And then part of the number, he's got like these transports flights, and he has all these numbers, and he comes up with them. I think a lot of them are ride-alongs. He had like some high number of unknown passengers, they're ride-alongs.
That's right.
They go on a scheduled flight. There's no additional cost to the city for them to do that. And so once again, slicing his data. So
yeah.
But
and I'll point out that some of the VIPs that I flew personally were police commissioners, the mayor,
yep.
city council people. They've been on flights. These are way above our pay grade decisions.
Yeah.
But those are part of what he's talking about. So are they inappropriate? Well, it depends. I mean, should we scrutinize flights like that? Yes, but I thought we did. I mean, I thought we scrutinized them. They weren't outrageous. Are there some that where you look at and you go, yeah, we probably shouldn't have done that? Yep. And I could name some. The point is that the vast majority of those were not as depicted. They made it, like Mike said, they made it sound like we were taking off to do that. Nonsense. You're out there flying patrol. Hey, if you got a minute, hey, Air 8, if you got a minute, could you go to the Veterans Cemetery in West LA at 1400 and do a flyby for an officer funeral, or a retired officer funeral? Okay, if we're available, we'll knock it out. And that's what would happen. And if we go do it, it's within our patrol area, and we're not on something of a higher priority, you go do it. What's the big deal? It's just part of being a good human and a good person, and respecting our profession and the people that are no longer with us. There's a lot of easy ways to justify it, but they depicted it as something that isn't the norm. And it just wasn't the norm. Yes. That bird was flying. Yeah. That bird was already flying. Yeah. It's flying, whether it's flying over that funeral for that flyby, or it's flying over West LA, 10 blocks west of there, deterring a burglar, costs the same. Yeah. It's not additional cost. But it certainly implied it was.
Yeah. The implication that you're launching just for that thing, by itself is a lot. In reality, it was probably a 15 to 20 second event that was, that had transpired during the course of that flight.
And again, just to be clear, there are exceptions to that. The flybys with the formation cadre, that's 4 helicopters taking off, flying to a location, loitering, coming in for a funeral. That's completely different. But like Mike and I said, it's a handful, less than a handful. And those are important. Those are really important. And, they don't understand law enforcement in that realm. But those are the minority of those. I mean, he's talking about hundreds and hundreds. Yeah. Well, there's some that you take off, but the vast majority were already aircraft that were up that did this for a very brief moment in time of their 2.6 hours of their flight.
Well, like you'd mentioned, Jack, I think at the end of the day, this is I want to say it's not inconsequential for LAPD to get this audit written out and disseminated. It's, in my opinion, it's probably more of a nuisance than anything, because they've done a lot of work. You guys have done a lot of work to justify the existence. But in some ways, it might be a good thing. You talked about revisiting some of the practices that we have in place to document and record this data. Maybe it's a good time for us all to look at what we're doing and tighten it down just a little bit more. So at the end of the day, this might end up being a good thing for the overall public safety aviation community.
It's funny you say that, because I noticed in the past 2 weeks, LAPD Air Support has a new Instagram account.
Yeah.
And it's highlighting positive things, including one yesterday or 2 days ago where there's a robbery crew out there. They're hitting constantly in Southeast. They get a vehicle description of a silver Charger with a black gas cap. Guess who finds it in Newton Division? An air crew. And it results in multiple robbery suspects that were doing multiple robberies in custody. That showed up on Instagram. That's not by accident. I mean, I think it's one of the changes that they're seeing, that we have to constantly stay with the times here, and we have to get out the good things we're doing. So I think that's great. I think it's great. But that's new. It's brand new. They sent it out. I don't know if you got that, Mike, but they sent it out and made a big deal about it, saying, hey, follow us on Instagram. And most of the posts are these positive, look what we did posts. That's all good. It's all good. Public perception is important, and I get that. And if it takes social media to do it, that's great. As long as you're not dancing or something, I think it's great.
Yeah. You just, there was an issue with that. And what we were having was, you got to realize if you're doing that, that's all discoverable too. So you got to keep that in mind, and that won't stop it, but just realize it can all end up in court. It's discoverable. But, in a lot of ways, police departments, and not just aviation units, police department are behind the power curve on social media and things like that we could be using much to our benefit. I agree with that. The one thing that I hope everybody takes out of this, be it is, once again, nothing ever matters until it matters. And this is it. And once you see some, I remember a couple of things happening, some major events that occurred in the department, like Rodney King, the Rampart. And I used to tell guys all the time, nothing ever matters until it matters. When you have something like that and you see those investigations, just how hard they deep, now all of a sudden, all these little things matter. And that's what the guys got to say about these little things. The other thing I just want to point about, and you brought this up about, this, and it supports all of what we're saying about this being political, being used for political means. And what I like to say is I've met a lot of people in my life, but I've never met anyone who ever said, when I grow up, I want to get into politics and be the city controller of the city of LA. It's like, what, the dog catcher? You don't vote for that anymore? And if you look, that's a position. And so when I read this report, one of the questions I had is, who's the target? Obviously, this is political, but who's the target? Is it the police department, or is it another politician? Is it, is he trying to, he's just using the police department for traction? And so the point is sometimes there's a lot of that infighting, and there's people out there in the political environment that want to support the police. They need to, they know how that's good. And if you have these numbers, if you have these datas, if you have these gee whiz stories, they can go to the, it makes them feel good. So that, you have friends in high places, and just because somebody makes you a target, as long as you can respond, you have to be able to, help a brother out there. So, so just, that's all.
Before we close out, I want to touch on one thing, Jack, that you brought up, and it's social media. I think law enforcement and governmental agencies in general have been afraid of social media for a whole host of reasons. But it's very evident and clear that social media is the way people consume information today. And, in a day where you want the public to have favorable opinions and understanding of what police are doing, you look at social media, it's a very efficient and cost-effective way to be transparent and to show where the money that they're investing through their tax dollars is going. And you look at canine operations and air support in particular, there's a high interest in those programs to begin with. Yeah. And so for cities and agencies that don't have a social media account that promotes and is transparent in how they're utilizing their air support program, for example, I think you're behind the curve. And, a lot of agencies are getting better, mine included. but I'm hoping that as we go down this road, that these units embrace that sooner than later, because that is a part of transparency and public trust. And it's just like I said, cost effective and efficient way to promote what we're doing. So,
I see that, lately, LAPD on social media, they'll put out some of the body camera footage of officer-involved shootings. And when you really see, how chaotic and how fast and, just, what is going on, all of a sudden, I would have just winged them. It's invaluable when people really see that you have a young police officer and they're up against a life and death situation. And there's that one where you can hear the bullet hit like the railing right next to the guy, and it brings it to home. Hey, there's a chance you may not live through it. Social media can be used definitely to our advantage, and we are behind the power curve on it.
Yeah. I always think it's funny. They trust us with a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment and a gun, but they don't trust us with the keys to the social media account. And I get it in some ways, but in other ways I don't. Yeah. So anyhow, I appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedules to talk about this. It's, obviously it's a hot button issue and it's really important in our industry. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jack, for taking the time. And I'm sure this is going to come up again and again. So we'll reconvene here at some point and talk about some other issues, I'm sure.
This is great. Good having you, Mike. We knew that this would not only be informative, and educational, but entertaining, as you always are, because nobody is bigger than baseball.
Nobody's bigger than baseball. Hey, thanks for having me. I highly recommend retirement. It's more fun than I thought it would be. Now that I'm retired, I don't know how I ever had time to work, boy. Thank you for your time, guys. Thanks for the invite.
All right. Catch you guys later. Cheers.
Take care.
Cheers.
This is the end of part 3 of our conversation with Mike Daly. Thanks for joining us for this very important conversation. Feel free to DM or email us with any questions or best practice suggestions as it relates to this conversation. Stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Thanks to our sponsor, Anodyne Electronics Manufacturing, a leading manufacturer of trusted special mission avionics for law enforcement, aerial firefighting, and utility operators. Visit www.aem-corp.com and learn how AEM's digital communication and loudspeaker systems, avionics consoles, radios, and specialty audio products can support your most demanding missions. Thank you to our sponsor, Shotover. Shotover Systems is the leading developer and manufacturer of high-performance gyro-stabilized cameras with advanced real-time AR mapping and mission management, all backed by unparalleled custom training and support. Now offering the M2 multi-sensor system, Sol 6-axis EO/IR platform with 4K Ultra HD color and infrared technology. Ideal for law enforcement and defense. Offered with real-time AR overlays to quickly identify streets, weather, and traffic. Automated license plate recognition, 24-megapixel digital photographs, and automated steering and tracking.
Thanks for sticking around and for supporting our sponsors who make these conversations possible. This 3-part series has come to an end. I hope that it has given some insight into the audit and sparks internal conversations on ways to improve how your program keeps track of information that will be absolutely crucial when you're looking to expand or defend your public safety aviation program. Upcoming for the Hangar Z podcast is a conversation with Tyler and Sean from Massif. Massif designs and produces high-quality FR flight suits and clothing. I was in charge of researching and testing flight suits at my agency for some time, and I always loved Massif gear. You'll enjoy the 2-part series with Tyler and Sean. They both have really interesting backgrounds and a vast amount of knowledge on FR flight gear. Thanks again for listening. Catch you later. Cheers.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts.